You already signed the disclaimer. That's what the probate clerk said, like she was reading the weather. I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4B with a coffee I hadn't touched and a phone pressed to my ear, trying to process how a sentence like that could exist in my life. "I'm sorry," I said. "The what?" "The disclaimer," she repeated, patient but firm. "You filed a notarized disclaimer of interest in your mother's estate. It's in the record. The inheritance has been distributed." For a moment, I couldn't hear the rest of what she said. All the sounds of the courthouse, footsteps, murmured conversations, the squeak of a cartwheel, blurred into white noise. I was 57 years old. I had signed a lot of things in my life: mortgage papers, school permission slips, tax returns, vendor contracts. I had never signed away my mother. "My mother died 3 weeks ago," I managed. "I haven't signed anything." The clerk paused, and in that pause I heard the tiniest shift in her tone, the sound of someone realizing they might be talking to the victim of something, not the man who made a mistake. "Sir," she said carefully, "if you believe this document is fraudulent, you need to speak to an attorney immediately." I ended the call and stared at the wall. The courthouse hallway was painted a bland, institutional beige. It felt like the exact color of disbelief. "My name is Tom Callahan. Most people call me Tom. I live outside St. Louis, Missouri, because that's where my job is and where my kids grew up. I'm a regional operations manager for a manufacturing supplier. Budgets, audits, compliance, the kind of work where you learn to trust paper more than promises. My mother, Kathleen, lived in a small town outside Dayton, Ohio. When she got sick, my younger brother Scott moved back into her house to help. I stayed in Missouri, visiting as often as I could, sending money when things got tight, and calling every Sunday at 6 p.m. like it was a law of physics. Scott always answered those calls with the same tone, cheerful, slightly rushed, like he was doing me a favor by letting me talk to my own mother. When Mom died, I drove through the night to Ohio. I hugged Scott in the driveway. I held my sister-in-law Jenna while she cried. I stood behind Scott at the funeral and watched him accept sympathy like it belonged to him. Grief makes you blind to small warning signs. But fraud doesn't happen in small signs. It happens in documents. And apparently one of those documents had my name on it. I walked into the clerk's office 20 minutes later with my driver's license in hand and my heart pounding like I was back in high school about to get called to the principal. The clerk behind the glass was middle-aged, tired, not cruel, just someone who'd seen too many families turn a death into a war. "What's your case number?" she asked. "I don't have one," I said. "I'm Thomas Callahan. My mother is Kathleen Callahan. She died on October 3rd. The clerk typed, her nails clicking against the keyboard. Then she frowned. "Oh," she said quietly. She looked up at me, and I saw that shift again. The moment someone recognizes the problem is bigger than a missing form. She slid a printed packet under the glass. "Is this your signature?" she asked. I picked up the papers with hands that felt too large for my body. On the first page, in bold, was the title, "Disclaimer of Interest in Estate of Kathleen M. Callahan." It stated that I, Thomas J. Callahan, voluntarily waived all rights to any inheritance from my mother's estate. It included language about understanding, free will, and no coercion. At the bottom, in a tight cursive, was a signature that looked like mine in a hurry. But it wasn't mine. It had a flourish I don't use. The T curled the wrong way. The J was shaped like a hook. And next to it was a notary stamp. Maribel Torres, Notary Public, State of Ohio. Notary ID number. Commission expiration date. A neat little seal that made a lie look official. My throat tightened. "I didn't sign this," I said. The clerk's eyes flicked down to the date, October 5th, 2 days after my mother died. That was the day I was back in Missouri because my kids had school and my boss wouldn't have cared that my grief didn't fit neatly into PTO policy. Scott had told me, "Don't worry about the paperwork, I'll handle it." I remembered that now, with a clarity that made my stomach turn. "Can I get copies?" I asked. "You can get certified copies," the clerk said. "It's $10. I slid my card under the glass like I was paying for a traffic ticket. The clerk handed me the certified copies and said softly, "Sir, you need to file an objection, but the estate might already be closed." Closed, like a door, like a coffin. I walked out of the courthouse and sat in my rental car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. I stared at the signature again, and I understood something that hurt more than the money. Someone had looked at my mother's death and thought, opportunity. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter, Erin. "Dad, why is Grandma's house on Zillow?" My blood went cold. I opened the screenshot she sent. It was a listing page, photos of my mother's living room, the porch, the backyard maple tree. The description said, "Charming family home, motivated seller." There was even a showing schedule link. I stared at it until the words stopped making sense. My mother had been dead for 3 weeks, and someone was already selling her house like it was a used couch. I wanted to call Scott immediately, to scream, to demand answers. But fraudsters live for reactions. A reaction makes you sloppy. Sloppy people make mistakes. So I didn't call. I called a lawyer. I found one through a friend of a friend recommendation, Evelyn Park, probate litigation. The receptionist asked my situation, and when I said, "Forged disclaimer," her voice sharpened. "Can you come in today?" she asked. "Yes," I said. I was in Evelyn Park's office by 2 p.m., sitting in a chair that cost more than my first car, sliding the disclaimer across her desk like it was a dead animal. Evelyn was in her early 40s, crisp suit, hair pulled back, eyes that didn't miss details. She read without expression. When she got to the signature and stamp, she leaned in, silent. "This is serious," she said finally. "Did you sign anything at the funeral home? Any paperwork at all?" "No," I said. "Scott said he'd handle it." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Okay. First thing, we file a motion to reopen the estate and a motion for emergency orders, freeze distributions, stop the sale, preserve evidence. Second, we subpoena the notary journal and the notary's ID verification. Third, we put a lease pendens on the house so no buyer can claim innocent purchaser without notice." "Notary journal?" I asked. "In Ohio, notaries are required to keep a record," Evelyn said. "If this notary did it properly, there will be an entry, who appeared, what ID was shown, date and time. If she didn't do it properly, that's even better for us." Better felt like the wrong word, but I understood. Fraud only survives in darkness. The moment you turn on lights, it starts to fall apart. "What about the Zillow listing?" I asked. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "That means he's moving fast," she said. "We file today." She slid a retainer agreement toward me. I signed with my real signature, deliberately, slowly. Then I did the thing that surprised even me. I turned my phone around and took a photo of my signature on the retainer. "Why?" Evelyn asked. "Because someone is using my name," I said. "I'm documenting everything now." Evelyn looked at me for a long beat, then nodded once. "Good," she said. "That mindset will keep you alive in this case." By the next morning, Evelyn filed the motions. She also filed a notice of potential fraud with the probate court and requested an emergency hearing. Then she said, "Now we gather." Gather meant evidence, not feelings, not suspicions, evidence. We started with a notary. Maribel Torres's commission was active. The stamp looked real, which meant either she notarized it or someone forged her seal. Either way, there was a trail. Evelyn's investigator, an older man named Hank who spoke like he'd spent years in law enforcement, went to the address on Maribel's commission record. It wasn't a law office. It was a shipping store and a strip mall. Hank called me from the parking lot. "She's a notary working at a pack and ship place," he said. "I can see the stamp station behind the counter." "Can you talk to her?" I asked. I can, Hank said. But it's better if we do it formally. Subpoena. Less room for her to forget things. Evelyn agreed. We subpoenaed Maribel's notary journal and requested the store's security footage for October 5th between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. At the same time, Evelyn pulled the probate file and found something else that made my chest tighten. A quitclaim deed had been recorded, 2 days after the disclaimer. It transferred Mom's house from estate of Kathleen Callahan to Scott Callahan as sole beneficiary. The deed carried a notary stamp too, different notary, different county. Can he do that? I asked, voice low. Evelyn's expression hardened. Not without lawful authority, she said. But criminals don't ask permission. They record paper and hope no one challenges it. That's when I realized the disclaimer wasn't the end. It was the key that unlocked everything else. The deed, the house listing, the bank accounts, anything with Mom's name on it. Evelyn filed an emergency motion to freeze the property transfer and to place a hold with the county recorder. Then she sent preservation letters to the realtor listed on Zillow. The realtor called within an hour. A young woman with a nervous voice. Mr. Callahan? I'm so sorry.
Your brother told me everything was clear. What did he tell you? Evelyn asked on speaker.
That he inherited the house, the realtor said. He provided documents. Evelyn's tone stayed calm. You are now on notice of potential fraud, she said. Cease marketing immediately. Any sale will be challenged. The realtor's breath caught. I had no idea, she whispered. I'll take it down. The listing vanished that afternoon. Small victory, but it meant Scott knew I was coming. Waiting was the worst part, not because nothing was happening, but because I knew Scott was living in the gap between my ignorance and the court's awareness. He had time to move money, time to sell jewelry, time to empty the house, time to rewrite my mother into his property. On Thursday, Scott finally called me. I stared at his name on my phone and felt my pulse spike. I answered anyway, because silence can be used against you too. Tom, Scott said, too upbeat. Hey man, are you holding up? I kept my voice neutral. I'm handling things, I said. There was a pause, a tiny recalibration. You coming back to Ohio soon? We should talk about Mom's stuff. Funny you mentioned paperwork, I said. Scott laughed, forced. Yeah, paperwork is a nightmare. Probate is... Did you file a disclaimer in my name? I asked. Silence. Long enough that I could hear the faint hum of his refrigerator through the phone. What? He said finally. Voice rising like an actor hit his cue. Tom, what are you talking about? I have a notarized disclaimer with my signature on it, I said. Dated October 5th. Scott exhaled hard, as if offended. Why would I do that? I don't know, I said. That's why I hired a probate litigation attorney. Another pause, this time shorter. Then Scott's voice went cold. Tom, he said, don't do this. Mom wanted me to have the house. She told me. You live in Missouri. You don't need any of this. I stared at the wall in my hotel room. Anger spreading but contained.
It's not about needing, I said. It's about truth.
Scott's tone sharpened. Truth? The truth is, you weren't here. I was. I wiped her mouth when she couldn't swallow. I drove her to chemo. I listened to her cry at night. Where were you? I could feel the hook, the guilt trap, the emotional argument designed to make money into morality. I kept my voice even. You being here doesn't give you the right to forge my name, I said. Scott's breath came louder. No one forged anything, he snapped. Maybe you signed it and forgot. You were a mess at the funeral. The audacity of that lie made my vision flicker.
I wasn't in Ohio on October 5th, I said. My phone records, my toll records, my work badge, my credit card charges all say I was in Missouri. Scott went quiet. Then softer, he said, Tom, you're making this ugly. You already made it ugly, I replied, and ended the call. That night, Jenna texted me. Please stop. Scott is devastated. Mom would be ashamed. I stared at the text and felt something in me detach. Mom's ghost was always the weapon of choice. I didn't respond. Friday afternoon, the subpoena responses came in. Maribel Torres's notary journal entry for October 5th existed, and it did not match me. It listed Thomas J. Callahan as the signer, yes, but under ID presented it said, Ohio driver license, number ending 4421. My Missouri license doesn't end in 4421. It ends in 1987. Evelyn tapped the page with her pen. Either she wrote down the wrong number, she said, or someone presented a fake ID. Hank called again, voice low. I talked to a cashier at the store, he said. She remembers the notarization. Says the guy looked like he was in a hurry, and he had another guy with him. Another guy? I asked. Yeah, Hank said. She said the signer wasn't alone. My stomach tightened. Scott. And who else? Hank's next sentence answered that.
She described the companion as tall, nice suit, carried a folder. Sounds like an attorney or someone trying to look official. Evelyn's face hardened. Get the footage, she said. The store's security footage arrived Monday morning. Evelyn and I watched it in her office. The video quality wasn't cinematic, but it didn't need to be. At 11:17 a.m., Scott walked into the pack and ship store. He was wearing the same black jacket he wore at the funeral. Behind him walked a tall man in a suit carrying a folder. Scott approached the counter. He handed over papers. Maribel leaned in, looked at the ID. Scott signed. Then the suited man leaned forward and said something. Maribel nodded. The suited man, after Scott finished signing, took the documents, slid them into the folder like it was any other business transaction. Then, as they turned to leave, Scott glanced toward the camera. Not directly, but close enough that I felt like he was looking through time at me. Evelyn paused the footage and zoomed in. The suited man's face was clear for a moment. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. I know him, she said. Who? I asked. Evelyn clicked her mouse, rewound, paused again. That's Paul Hensley, she said. He's an attorney, used to do estates, and he just walked into a felony on camera. My stomach dropped. Paul Hensley had been at the funeral. He had hugged Scott. He had shaken my hand and said, Your mother spoke highly of you. He'd introduced himself as a family friend. Scott said Paul was helping with probate, I said slowly. Evelyn's mouth tightened. Then he was helping himself, she said. And now we have the proof. The next day, Evelyn filed an emergency motion with the security video attached. The court scheduled a hearing for Thursday. In the meantime, Evelyn filed a complaint with the Ohio Notary Commission and the State Bar against Paul Hensley. If he pressured that notary to accept a fake ID, Evelyn said, he's done. Will Scott be done? I asked. Evelyn looked at me. Scott will be whatever the evidence makes him, she said. But I will tell you this. People who forge inheritance documents don't stop with one paper. They move fast. They cash out. Cash out. So I drove to my mother's house again. Scott's truck was in the driveway. This time there was no U-Haul, but there was a for sale sign leaning in the garage, not yet placed outside. And the front hallway looked stripped, photos removed, shelves bare. He was staging. I didn't confront him inside the house. That would become trespass, harassment, threatening. Instead, I did what Evelyn taught me. I documented. I took photos from public view. I sent them to Evelyn. Then I checked the county recorder online. The quitclaim deed was still there. The fraud was already on the official record. Evelyn filed an emergency request to void it temporarily and put a litigation hold on the property. She also subpoenaed the notary who stamped the deed. 2 notaries, 2 counties, 2 trails. That's when my Aunt Linda called. Linda was my mother's older sister, the family peacekeeper, the woman who believed if you just talked politely enough, everyone would become decent. "Tommy," she said, voice trembling, "Scott says you're trying to take his home." I closed my eyes. "He says Mom wanted him to have everything because you weren't here," she continued. "Is that true?" My jaw tightened. "No," I said, and he forged my signature. There was silence, then a soft gasp. "Scott wouldn't." "Linda," I said gently, "I have video." A long pause. Finally, she whispered, "Oh my God." I could hear the grief in her voice, not just for Mom, but for the version of Scott she wanted to believe in. "Please don't do anything rash," she said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm doing everything documented." Thursday's hearing arrived like a storm. In probate court, everything looks smaller than television. The judge sits behind a desk, not a towering bench. People stand too close. The air smells like paper and old carpet. Scott sat at a table with Paul Hensley beside him. Paul looked calm, as if security footage didn't exist. Jenna sat behind them, eyes sharp. Evelyn sat with me, binder thick with tabs. The judge, a woman in her 60s with glasses and no patience, began with the disclaimer. "Mr. Callahan," she said to me, "you are claiming this disclaimer is fraudulent." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. She turned to Scott. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "you filed this disclaimer." Scott's face didn't flicker. "Yes," he said. "My brother didn't want anything. He said so." The lie was smooth. Evelyn stood. "Your Honor," she said, "this case hinges on credibility. We have security footage from the notary location showing the signer was not Mr. Thomas Callahan, and that Mr. Scott Callahan appeared in person with attorney Paul Hensley to execute the disclaimer." Paul's head snapped toward Evelyn for the first time. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You have video?" she asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. The clerk played it. Scott's face drained of color as his own body walked onto the screen. Paul's eyes widened, then narrowed. The judge watched without expression. When the video ended, she looked up slowly. "Mr. Hensley," she said, voice like ice. "Stand." Paul stood, smoothing his jacket. "Is that you in this footage?" the judge asked. Paul hesitated. "Your Honor, This is not complicated," the judge cut in. "Is that you?" Paul swallowed. "Yes," he said. "And did you advise a notary to notarize a disclaimer allegedly signed by Mr. Thomas Callahan while Mr. Thomas Callahan was not present?" Paul's mouth opened, then closed. Scott shifted, sweat visible at his temple. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Hensley," she said, "you are an officer of the court. You understand the consequences of participating in fraud." Paul's voice tightened. "Your Honor, there may be a misunderstanding." Evelyn didn't argue. She handed up the notary journal entry, showing the wrong ID number and my Missouri license record. Then she handed up a document, my work badge log for October 5th, showing I entered the plant in Missouri at 7:58 a.m. and left at 5:12 p.m. The judge looked at it, then back at Scott. "Mr. Scott Callahan," she said, "did you sign your brother's name on this disclaimer?" Scott's voice cracked. "No," he said, too quick. The judge's gaze didn't move. Evelyn spoke again. "Your Honor, there is also a recorded quitclaim deed executed days later, transferring estate property to Mr. Scott Callahan. We request an immediate hold on transfer and a full accounting." Scott's head whipped toward Evelyn, anger flickering into panic. The judge exhaled, slow. "Here's what we're doing," she said. She issued an immediate order freezing all further distributions. She ordered the estate reopened. She ordered Scott to account for all assets moved or sold. She ordered the property transfer frozen and a lis pendens confirmed. She ordered Paul Hensley to withdraw and referred him to the state bar and prosecutor for investigation. And then she said the sentence that felt like oxygen after weeks underwater. Mr. Thomas Callahan's disclaimer is hereby deemed void pending forensic review. Void. The lie had been cracked open. Outside the courtroom, Scott cornered me near the elevator. His face was red. His voice was low and vicious. "You couldn't just let me have it," he hissed. "You had to come in and ruin everything." I looked at him, and for the first time I saw my brother clearly. Not as the kid I used to protect, but as a man who believed love was something you could steal and then justify. "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "You did. When you forged my name." Scott's eyes gleamed with fury. "Mom wanted me to have the house," he spat. "If Mom wanted that," I said evenly, "she would have written it. She didn't. So you faked it." Scott's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter.
Then he leaned closer. "You think you win?" he whispered. "You don't. You'll lose your family over this. Everyone will know you're the greedy one." I felt a strange calm. "Everyone will know you forged your brother's signature," I said. Scott flinched as if I'd slapped him. He turned and walked away fast, Jenna scrambling after him. Evelyn touched my shoulder. "Don't engage," she said quietly. "We're not done." She was right. We weren't done. The next phase was accounting. Over the next month, Scott's story fell apart in spreadsheets and subpoenas. Evelyn subpoenaed bank records. We found transfers from the estate's account into Scott's personal account. We found a cashier's check written to cash. We found charges at a jewelry store. We found a wire labeled Hensley Consulting. Paul had been paid, not for probate work, for fraud. We also found something that made my stomach drop in a different way. A brokerage account in Mom's name, one I didn't know existed, had been liquidated 2 days after the disclaimer. A recorded phone call from the brokerage captured a man claiming to be me, Thomas Callahan, providing verification details and requesting a transfer. The man's voice wasn't mine, but he knew my mother's maiden name, he knew the last 4 of her social security, he knew the security question answers. Scott had lived in her house for months. He had access to her mail, her files, her life. He hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen identity. The brokerage froze the transfer after Evelyn contacted their fraud department. But part of it had already moved. Evelyn traced the receiving account. It was not Scott's name. It was a newly opened account under a name I didn't recognize. A friend. A mule. That's when the prosecutor's office got interested. Because forgery is one thing, identity theft and financial fraud across multiple institutions is another. The notary, Maribel Torres, was interviewed.
She initially claimed she followed procedure. Then Hank pulled the store footage again and found the moment Paul leaned in and tapped the ID like he was telling her, "It's fine." Maribel's story changed. "He made me feel stupid," she said later in deposition, voice shaking. "He said the brother was traveling. He said it was urgent. I thought it was legitimate." Evelyn didn't raise her voice. "Did you verify the person in front of you matched the name on the document?" she asked. Maribel looked down. I thought I did," she whispered. Evelyn slid the still image across. Scott signing Thomas Callahan. Maribel started crying. It didn't matter. Notaries exist to prevent exactly this. Meanwhile, the estate wasn't just the house and the brokerage account. That was the next twist. When Evelyn pulled the full asset list, we discovered something Scott hadn't mentioned in the weeks after the funeral. Mom had inherited mineral rights from her father, small royalty payments from a family farm lease. Not millions, but steady. And she had a life insurance policy Scott never told me about. $250,000. The beneficiary designation named both sons equally. Scott had already filed a claim. He had tried to collect my half using the fake disclaimer. That's why he needed it notarized so quickly. The fraud wasn't about keeping the house. It was about cashing out everything before anyone noticed. The day I learned about the life insurance policy, I sat in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling. My mother had left a final gift for her sons, and Scott had tried to steal it from me while grieving his own mother. That kind of betrayal doesn't heal easily. In January, the criminal case began. Scott was charged with forgery, identity theft, and theft from an estate. Paul Hensley was charged separately for assisting in fraud and notary intimidation, and the bar began disbarment proceedings. Scott's attorney offered what they always offer when the evidence is strong: a deal. Plead, restitution, probation, no prison if he cooperated. Scott didn't want prison. He also didn't want to admit he was wrong. So he tried a different tactic. He called our father. My dad, Frank Callahan, was 81 and fragile since Mom died. Scott weaponized that fragility like it was a tool. Dad called me late one night, voice trembling. "Tom," he whispered, "why are you doing this to your brother?" I closed my eyes. "Dad," I said softly. "Scott forged my name." Dad's breath rattled. "He said you're trying to take the house." "I'm trying to stop fraud," I said. "There's video." Dad was quiet for a long time. Then he said, like the words cost him, "Your mother would want you boys to stick together." I swallowed. "She would want us to be honest," I said. Dad started crying. Not loud, just quiet, broken sounds through the phone. "I can't lose another family," he whispered. That sentence hit harder than any legal document. I lowered my voice. "You're not losing me," I said, "but I'm not letting Scott steal in Mom's name." Dad didn't answer. The line stayed open with his breathing until he finally said, "Okay." Not agreement, just surrender to a reality he didn't want. 2 weeks later, Scott pleaded. He admitted to signing the disclaimer. He admitted Paul pressured the notary. He admitted using a fake ID obtained through a friend. He claimed he felt entitled because he had been caregiving. The judge didn't care about entitlement. "Grief does not grant permission," she said. Scott received probation, restitution, and a criminal record that would follow him like a shadow. Paul's consequences were worse. His license was suspended, his reputation burned, his future tied to criminal courtrooms instead of client meetings. The estate was restored as much as it could be. Not fully. Some items were gone, jewelry sold, cash spent, but the major assets were preserved. The house remained tied up until the court authorized sale properly. The life insurance was paid out correctly with equal shares. The mineral rights stayed intact. And the brokerage account was recovered partially through a fraud claim and freeze. One afternoon in March, I returned to my mother's house with a court order in my pocket. Scott had to vacate within 30 days. He wasn't there when I arrived. The house was quiet, colder than I remembered. The wind chime still hung on the porch, silent. I walked through each room slowly. The living room smelled faintly like Mom's lotion. Her favorite chair was gone. The spot where it sat looked like a pale square on the carpet. I found the family photo album in a closet. Thank God Scott hadn't taken it. I sat on the floor in the hallway and flipped through it. There was a picture of Scott and me as kids, dirty-faced, laughing, holding a fish we'd caught at the lake. Mom stood behind us, proud and tired. She had loved us, both of us. And in the end, we'd turned her death into a case file. I put the album back and stood. I wasn't here to punish Scott. The court would do that. I was here to close a chapter correctly. In April, the estate closed again, this time with real signatures. The house sold. After debts and fees, my share wasn't a fortune, but it was meaningful. I put half into college accounts for my kids. I put some into retirement because I'm not 20 anymore, and time doesn't negotiate. And I did something my mother would have liked. I donated a portion to the hospice that cared for her, in her name. Not because charity fixes betrayal, but because it keeps you from becoming bitter. But even after the money was traced and the papers were corrected, Scott still tried to win the only war he thought mattered, the story people told about him. A week after the plea, my Aunt Linda called again, voice tight. "Tommy," she said, "Scott posted something online." I don't use Facebook much. Most of my life happens in spreadsheets and manufacturing floors, not comment sections. But I opened the app and typed Scott's name. The post was public. A photo of Scott standing on Mom's porch, looking tired, holding a cardboard box like he was moving out of a burning building. Caption: "Sometimes family punishes you for being the one who stayed. I took care of Mom. Now I'm being dragged through court by someone who couldn't be bothered to show up." Hundreds of reactions. Comments full of sympathy. People who didn't know the facts choosing the story that felt good. My hands went cold on the phone. Evelyn had warned me, when the documents fail them, they try the crowd. I took screenshots, sent them to Evelyn. Then I put the phone down and did nothing. Not because I was weak. Because I'd learned something in the last 2 months. The truth doesn't get louder when you shout it. It gets clearer when you prove it. 2 days later, the prosecutor filed a motion. Defendant's public statements contradict sworn admissions. It wasn't dramatic, but it mattered. It told Scott the court was still watching. Scott deleted the post that night. Then Paul Hensley tried one last move. He left a voicemail on my phone from an unknown number. His voice was smooth, professional, offended that consequences existed. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "this is Paul Hensley. We can resolve this without further damage. If you stop cooperating with the prosecutor and agree to a mutual non-disparagement, I'm prepared to help fix the narrative." Fix the narrative. As if my mother's death had become a PR problem. I didn't call him back. I forwarded the voicemail to Evelyn. Evelyn's reply came 10 minutes later. "Thank you. That's witness tampering. We're filing it." That voicemail didn't just hurt Paul. It finished him. At Paul's bar hearing, Evelyn played the clip. The panel listened to his words, "fix the narrative," and watched his face tighten when he realized he couldn't talk his way out of a recording. The bar counsel asked him a simple question. "Why were you contacting a represented party directly?" Paul's answer was a stuttered mess. The panel recommended disbarment, and in a strange way, that was the moment I finally stopped shaking inside. Because it meant the system had seen him, not the polished funeral hug version, the real one. After Scott vacated the house, I returned one more time with Aunt Linda. She wanted to collect a few of Mom's things, recipe cards, a quilt, the small ceramic angel Mom kept by the sink. We walked through the kitchen together. Linda's hands trembled as she opened drawers, touching utensils like they were relics. She pulled a battered metal recipe box off the counter. It was the one Mom used every Thanksgiving, the one that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Linda flipped through cards, eyes wet. Then she froze. "Tommy," she whispered. "What?" I asked. She held up an envelope, yellowed at the edges, tucked behind the recipe cards. My name was on it, written in Mom's careful print. I took it with hands that suddenly felt too big again. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before Mom died. "Tom, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone or close to it. I love you and Scott. I'm proud of you both. Please don't let grief turn you into strangers. My wishes are simple. Split everything equally, the house, the insurance, all of it. Scott has helped me, yes, but you have been there too in your own way. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Love, Mom." I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the words until my vision blurred. Scott's entire justification, Mom wanted me to have it, collapsed into ash. Because Mom had predicted the fight, and she had left the truth where she knew we'd find it, behind the recipes, in the place our family returned to every year. I scanned the letter and sent it to Evelyn, even though we no longer needed it legally. I needed it personally. It was the antidote to the guilt trap. It was my mother's voice, unfiltered, on paper. When I drove back to Missouri, I kept a printed copy in my glove compartment like a talisman. Not for court. Court was over. For the nights when I'd wake up and wonder if I'd done the right thing. Because grief makes you question yourself. And fraud feeds on that doubt. The letter starved it. Scott didn't call me, not once. Jenna sent one email months later. "I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. Happiness wasn't the point. Truth was. On the first anniversary of Mom's death, I drove to Ohio alone. I stood at her grave and set down a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. I spoke softly, like she could hear. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have protected your wishes better. I should have seen what Scott was becoming." The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment it sounded like the chimes on her porch. I didn't forgive Scott that day. Forgiveness is a process, not a court order, but I did forgive myself for believing the best in my brother for too long. Because there's a line between love and denial, and I had crossed that line for years. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text from my son Luke. "Dad, can you help me with my budget project? Teacher says we have to plan for unexpected expenses." I smiled, a real smile. "Yeah," I texted back. "I have a story about unexpected expenses." At home, I opened a folder on my laptop labeled probate. Inside were scanned documents, the fake disclaimer, the notary journal, the court order voiding it, the security footage stills, the restitution schedule. Proof that my mother's inheritance had disappeared, and proof that it came back. Not because I screamed, but because I stayed steady and followed the trail. Fraud feeds on emotion. It starves under light. That was the lesson. And it was the last thing my mother taught me, even from the grave. Your name is worth defending. End.